Welcome to the Founder Insights podcast from the Founder Institute. I'm Jonathan Greachin, co-founder of the Founder Institute, and on these podcasts, we try to bring you useful startup insights from our global network of entrepreneurs and mentors. In this episode, you'll hear from Nikki Dryden. She's a human rights lawyer, Olympic swimmer, and director of U.S. Immigration at PwC. She's going to be discussing immigration and specifically how you can move your company to the United States and avoid some of the common legal mistakes. This interview was done by Mike Supervici, who's an EIR at the Founder Institute and the leader of our graduate support group. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Mike Supervici. I run the graduate success team here at the Founder Institute, and we have a very special guest today, Nikki, who's going to talk about one of the most relevant and important topics today on immigration. So, Nikki, if you don't mind, maybe giving a quick introduction about yourself, that'd be a really good way for us to get started.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's very fun to talk to all of you, imagining where you're all sitting today. So I'm born in Canada, and then immigrated to the United States myself and as a young person. So I completely understand the draw of the United States and the American dream because I certainly had it and moved there when I was about 18 and kept being my own immigration lawyer, which I do not recommend, figuring out ways to stay. And I was very lucky. I had a second life as a swimmer and was able to get my green card that way. But certainly it took me over 20 years to become a US citizen. Hopefully, if you hire me, I will be better now because I've learned all my mistakes through my own immigration story. But so now I'm an immigration lawyer at PwC, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, startups, helping them navigate U.S. immigration laws and get to the United States. So, I love the excitement of working with people in tech and innovation, and I know that you move all way faster than everybody in the law, and so I try to keep up with you.
Yeah, that's great, and everyone that's dialing in, looks like a lot of people are starting to dial in now. Hello, everyone. If you notice on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat room. Feel free to basically ask questions here, and I will relay them to Nikki as she goes through her presentation. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We're doing this for you, so make sure that you ask as many questions that come up. I know this is a very important topic, and we have a world expert on this issue, so take advantage of this. So. Nikki, I believe that you have a presentation. So do you want to go ahead and share that now?
Yep.
Go. Okay.
Okay. How's that looking?
It's looking great. Perfect.
All right. Wonderful.
All right.
Okay.
Let's go.
All right, then. All right, I'll take it away, everybody. Okay. Oh, little tech problem here. It won't let me go forward.
If you just, just go ahead and close that. And if you just select the right
there we go. There we go. So that's my colleague, Derek, who didn't quite make it, but I apologize that you're going to have to listen to my voice for the next hour or so. But they're obviously at PwC. I'm part of a very large immigration team, and we do have people all over the world that can help you pretty much wherever you're located in the world. And so this is just a nice view of the couple of us that work there and help with U.S. immigration matters. One of my expertises is working at the consulate, so helping people with the final step of their process, the immigrant visa, the visa application. But also, we work with filings to the United States immigration as well. So I'm going to start with some of the sort of bad news because I think it's really important. Obviously, a lot of you, American immigration news is actually probably quite global. And I live outside the United States now, and I certainly am hearing it in the local news here. And it's quite unprecedented. So not since 9/11 have we seen such a dramatic shift in the immigration policy. And I think, to be honest, it's actually even worse than after 9/11. So just the tone, the way immigration is a topic in United States news, it's a very current event in the political landscape as well. And and I think what that means for you as you're planning to move to the United States is that you have to be prepared. Long gone are the days when you could just jump on a plane and get in and do things on a tourist visa. You really have to be prepared. You have to be prepared for every step of the way when you're going to interact with a U.S. government official. I tell everybody to pay for good strategy. I know that cost is always going to be an issue with the startup, but the most important thing you do is pay to get good advice. You don't have to pay PwC to implement it, but pay for somebody who knows what they're talking about to give you the strategy involved, and to help you put in place compliance mechanisms, because things are only going to get worse. And as many of you probably know, there's a really big election coming up in the United States called the midterm elections, which is going to happen in November. And immigration is certainly being used as a tool in all of those political contests. What this has meant, how this has played out, is that there's been a huge increase in funding for what we call immigration enforcement. And don't think that this just means people that are, sitting in the United States, working unlawfully in particular industries like, sweatshops and stuff. This is happening at the border at LAX, at JFK. So when you come into the United States by plane, there are more officials that can interact with you. So we'll talk a little bit about temporary travel and stuff before you get the startup going and what kind of visas you come in. But I think it's important to understand that when you land at the airport, it is the CBP officers or Customs and Border Protection officers. Their job is they are law enforcement officers. Okay, they think of themselves as a federal police. They are not there to facilitate international trade and commerce. That's the job of the State Department, and we will talk about them later. So, you have to be prepared that if you would like to enter the United States, you must be willing to surrender everything that you have with you and to a search. The Supreme Court has ruled that any search at the U.S. border is considered reasonable. And what that means is that the border officer, if you would like to gain admission, your laptop is the same as a suitcase, and your fingerprint and your passcode to your phone are considered the keys to your suitcase. So you need to keep everything clean. I recommend all my clients keep everything on the cloud and log out of every single device before they enter the United States. That's not just because you might be not following the immigration law. That's actually just because you don't really want the contents of your laptop, whatever you're working on, to be going into a US government database. If you do end up in secondary inspection, they pop now this is where my tech knowledge is, you guys are going to be embarrassed by me, but they'll pop a device into your laptop and they can download everything. And then where does it go? And I think that's the kind of thing, it's not just about you gaining admission to the United States, it's about actually protecting the contents of your laptops and your ideas. Where we're also seeing this play out is once you get to the United States and you're in a office environment, U.S. Immigration has increased their fraud visits. So if you have any employees, and it doesn't need to be you, it could be a colleague who's working on an L visa or an H-1B. So let's just say you're working in a shared work site somewhere, right? So you may not have the same corporate structure as the person sitting next to you, but you're all in a shared work environment. If if U.S. Immigration comes knocking to visit somebody on an H-1B visa at the desk next to you, who knows, they might just say, hey, what are you doing here? Where's your papers? And so these kind of fraud visits are increasing. And then the other way that what they've just done recently is the Department of Labor just issued 5,000 employers with audits for I-9 verification. So any U.S. employer that hires anyone in the United States, whether they're a U.S. citizen, or a foreign national, has to issue them with a paper called an I-9, and the employee has to fill it out. And those I-9 forms have to be kept at the work site. So this is yet another way the U.S. government is going after even lawful employers. The other big thing to be worried about, we will talk about arrests, but the other thing we're seeing is for the last few years, and I think it even started under the Obama administration, if you were in the United States, so let's say you've got your visa, you're doing great, everything's wonderful, you you've got, whoops, sorry. You get arrested for a DUI, which is a driving under the influence or driving while intoxicated. Immediately that information in the US criminal database will get sent over to the consulate where you got your visa, and your visa will be automatically revoked. And you don't even have to be convicted of the DUI. That's because driving under the influence is considered a health ground of inadmissibility to the United States, not a criminal ground. And they think that you are considered, if you're driving when you're impaired, you have you're a habitual drunkard. Now, what we're seeing now is this is taken to a next level. People are being arrested in the United States for other things, and their visas are being revoked. If this happens, don't move. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to leave the United States, and that's the big thing. Just go talk to an immigration lawyer. And the last thing to just be wary of is there's obviously, I think there's a chance that another federal budget needs to be decided on in U.S. Congress by October. If that happens and there's another U.S. federal government shutdown, it's going to delay processing to these 3 visa categories because they all are connected to the Department of Labor. Most immigration functions will continue because they are user pay. So you and your employer will pay lots of money to the U.S. government to adjudicate your case. But these 3 things down there don't have that. And so they will stop processing. So if you want to be going to the United States in October, you need to be organized in September because, it might only shut down for a few days or a few weeks, but, this is all going to delay everything to get to the United States. All right, so let's just take a huge step back. Now that I've painted a very horrible picture, obviously lots of people do go to the United States. And so I just want to explain one simple some complex concept. So there's 2 types of ways you can go to the United States. One as a non-immigrant, which is a temporary person, and one as an immigrant, which means permanent. Non-immigrant visa holders. So everyone that lands at that LAX or JFK or Houston, they have to prove that they have no intention of staying permanently in the United States. Okay, so when you go on a tourist visa or you go on business visitor, or if you go on an E3 for Aussies, you have to prove that you're not staying forever. There's a few visas that let you have what we call dual intent, but for the most part, this is all temporary work visas. The alternative is a green card, which is permanent residence in the United States. There's only 5 ways you can get that: family-based, employer-based, self-sponsored. Those are for people of extraordinary ability, and we will talk about that a bit later. The diversity lottery, that probably will go away. So the diversity lottery has been something that the Trump administration has set their sights on getting rid of. They've been using it as a bargaining tool in immigration. So I think the diversity lottery usually happens from September to December, October to December, that period of time. It's a State Department program, but I have a feeling it won't happen this year, but we'll have to just keep your eyes out. And then the last way to get a green card is to buy your green card through investment. Of $500,000 to $1 million with those numbers going up. The other big concept I just want to explain, and this just goes to all the U.S. government agencies that are involved in different parts of the process, is that there are U.S.-based filings, and then there are overseas or consular-based filings. And this is really critical right now, because if you can fit yourself into one of these consular-based cases, that's what you want to try to do, because filings that are going to U.S. immigration in the United States are under enormous scrutiny, like unprecedented scrutiny. What happens when you file a petition to U.S. immigration? Typically, a small amount of them would get issued what's called a request for evidence, which is like an audit where the government wants more information. Those are now increased, quite a lot, and then denials have increased. The other thing that's scary is that if you're actually in the United States when one of these is filed and it's denied, they're now automatically putting you into deportation proceedings. So you're starting to get the idea that things are really, you cannot do this alone. You have to have a good immigration lawyer guiding you through this process, because the stakes now are so high, not to mention the cost. So the kinds of cases that file to U.S. immigration are the one that probably all of you have heard about, which is the H-1B. We'll talk about that later. The intercompany transfer, O1 for people of extraordinary ability, and entrepreneur parole, which we will also discuss. The consular-based cases, which is where the case is actually adjudicated by the US State Department overseas. That means when you go into the consulate, you are arguing for yourself the requirements of the category, not just that you're eligible for the visa. Now, the ones at the top, you also need to go to a visa, but it's a slightly different process than these ones at the bottom, where you actually are applying for the visa and they're adjudicating it right there. So that's the ease for investors and traders and for Aussies. The blanket intercompany transfer, but that's for really big companies. And then some of these other ones, which we will talk about in a bit. So you have got this great opportunity in the United States. You want to go over either to do some kind of, maybe you got into an accelerator program. Maybe you just want to go talk to VCs. Maybe you just want to go have a look. Maybe there's a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to legitimate business travel to the United States before you decide you want to go over there and work. You'll hear these terms thrown around quite a bit. So ESTA, Visa Waiver Program, and the B1. Those are basically all kind of the same. They mean all the same thing, which is that you are applying for admission to the United States as a business visitor. Okay, so ESTA is really just the name of the electronic program that certain people can use to apply for the VWP or Visa Waiver Program. So depending on your country, your passport will depend whether you're eligible to use the Visa Waiver Program. If you aren't from one of those countries, then you're going to have to go to a US consulate and apply for a B1 visa. The difference between them is that the Visa Waiver Program allows entry in the United States for up to 90 days at a time. That does not mean you can fly in for 9 days, fly out for a week, and come back for another 90 days. This is meant for temporary travel. And this is where I'm starting to see a lot of entrepreneurs get caught because they're abusing this, the Visa Waiver Program, traveling in and out of the United States, treating this as like, just recharging the 90 days and spending way too much time in the United States. You are not supposed to be living in the United States on this visa category. Even the B1, which you might, depending on what your country passport is, you might get issued a 1-year B visa, you might get issued a 5-year B visa, you might get issued a 10-year B visa if you're from China. That doesn't mean you get to stay in the United States for 10 years. It means that when you land at the airport, you will be admitted for up to 6 months at a time. Again, do not stay there for 6 months unless you have spoken to an immigration lawyer about what you're doing there. But what it means is it's just different. So those are all the same sort of categories. You cannot perform productive work in the United States, okay? There's only one piece of immigration case law that describes what you can do in B1 status. And you guys are gonna laugh at me because this has nothing to do with what any of you are probably doing, but you need to put your business and your startup into this box, okay? So the case law is of a tailor, like a men's suit sewer, like someone who sews men's suits. He was based in Hong Kong. He came to the United States because all his customers were in the United States. He would measure them for their suits. Then he would fly home and sew the suits in Hong Kong. That is allowed under the business visitor travel. So you can go to the United States, you can talk to colleagues, you can talk to VCs, you can go to conferences. There's a whole bunch of things you can do, but as long as you bring all that information back to your home country where you will actually work on the project or do the work, okay? I've talked already about, I've talked a little bit about some of these issues, because where you're going to get caught is at the border. So if you go in and you say, oh, yep, I've got a startup, I'm already working on it. The second you use the word work, you're not going to be allowed into the United States. They are increasing the scrutiny of all business travelers, as I said, because there is just a lot more money for law enforcement, and you just need to be prepared. One important thing when you are traveling into the United States for business travel, you need to make sure that your social media and anything that's publicly available on Google is corresponding to the immigration status that you have. So if you have on your LinkedIn profile, Sydney and New York, and you don't have a work visa for the US, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because then right away they're going to Google you and see, well, why do you have New York on your LinkedIn profile? You say, well, I'm based there and I get customer. No. Your social media presence has to correspond with your home country. So LinkedIn profile, keep it, don't say Silicon Valley and London, you say London. The same with any tweeting you do, less likely probably, but anything that you put out there in terms of like, hey, I'm going to the US, I can't wait to, start my business. Like you have to be very careful and smart. And, that might hurt some of your business opportunities, but it's better to get into the United States than to be stopped because you have something out there on social media that doesn't correspond. We talked about the visa revocations of DUIs when you're in the US, but this is one that is really important, especially for any Canadians that might be on the call, given that marijuana I think it's coming into legalization soon. If you are at the border and the officer says to you, have you ever done illegal drugs, smoked marijuana, for example, and you say, yeah, I smoke marijuana in Canada all the time because it's legal there, or yes, I've actually been to Colorado and smoked marijuana in Colorado where it's legal, you will be denied entry to the United States. Marijuana is not legal at a federal level, okay? So even if it's legal in the country where you might have smoked it, even if it's legal in an American state where you might have been, it does not mean that it's legal to the federal government. So if you make an admission at the border to smoking marijuana or any kind of, recreational drug that's unlawful, you will be denied entry to the United States, and it will be at least a year before I or any other lawyer can get you back. And that's because an admission of drug use is not so much a criminal act because you haven't admitted to breaking any laws, but what you've done is you admitted that you have a health ground of inadmissibility and that you need to be rehabilitated before you can get back to the United States. So I do have clients where they are asked this at the border, and you just need to be prepared for that kind of questioning. Again, still on business visitor travel. So there are a lot of things that you can do, right? So, you can go over, take goods for manufacture abroad. You can negotiate contracts. Now, my tax colleagues at PwC are the ones that say, don't sign the contract in the United States. So I think that's, it's also probably good from an immigration perspective. So let's just say you go over to the US, you're meeting with all these investors, they're throwing money at you left, right, and center. You're so excited. They're like putting contracts in front of you. Do not sign them when you're physically present in the United States. That's important, unless you have spoken to a tax advisor and an immigration lawyer, even if they're throwing $5 million at you, maybe you do want to just give us a call and we'll talk to you in the moment. But it's really important that you get advice both on a tax front and an immigration front before you start signing things when you're in the US as a business visitor. The things that so within that B visa context, there's all these things that you're allowed to do, which are passive activities. So think about listening, learning, absorbing, taking information in, as opposed to doing, like working on your thing, producing work-out product for clients, deliverables, all those things are bad. But there are exceptions to when you can do some work in the United States. And this is like, for example, professional athletes. So if you're a professional tennis player, you can go into the United States, play at the US Open, make the prize money, and then go back to Monaco or wherever it is that you live. My favorite exception to the B1 is yacht boat captains. I actually had to do one of these. So obviously, if someone sails a boat, they need to be able to bring the boat to the shore of the United States, which is work, but it would be silly because they're probably only touching shore for a little bit of time. There's a couple others. So after sales, installation, service, and repairs. This is could be a good one for either physical hardware or software. So this is where you would sell into the United States. The contract would be with an overseas company. The US customer in the sale of service, you have written into the contract that your people overseas are going to be needed to come to the United States to help service or train US citizens on how to use the software or the hardware. So that's a really good one for if you're doing sales into the United States on a very technical product where you need to bring your people over to help train the buyers. That is allowed under the visa waiver program or the B1. People who are going to be investing in the United States in an E2 capacity, and we'll talk a bit more about that, they are allowed to go over to the United States and set up a business as long as they don't start working for the business. And then there's another carve out, which is really awesome. So the B1 in lieu of H1B and the B1 in lieu of H3 are two sort of creations of the State Department. So again, that's the consulate. And what they've realized is that their job is to facilitate international trade and commerce in the United States. But because US immigration is so hard to get a visa, they have sort of said, well, there's exceptions. You can go on a B1 visa, but we're going to, as long as you tell us what you're going to be doing, we will allow you to perform this very specific activity for a very short period of time. So the B1 in lieu of H1B allows you to go over to the United States for short-term projects of up to 6 months max, where you stay on foreign payroll. So let's just say your company is based in Romania. You would stay on Romanian payroll, and you work for your Romanian company. And the only reason you have to be in the US is because there's something that a project that you have to do that no US citizen can do. That's a really great visa that I use a lot. There was a period of, it depends where you're from. I would be very cautious about using that if you're from India or China. But if you're from, other countries, and depending on how big your company is, you might be able to use that. The B1 in lieu of H3 is for training. So if you're going over for an accelerator program, and you actually, that's all you want to do. You actually don't want to move to the US with your business. You actually just want to go to this program and then come back to your home country. That a B1 in lieu of H3 is awesome because it allows you to stay, again, for longer than that. Especially if the accelerator is like 4 months instead of 3 months, you need to stay in the US a little bit longer to receive this training that you can only get in the United States. And then you're going to come back to your home country to implement the training. So those are amazing categories, and especially for people at the beginning of their journey to the United States. So this one, any questions, Mike, or should I keep barreling along?
There's a couple questions. So I have some questions, but there's a question in the chat room. Is like, what are like the standard processing times on the E1 and E2 visas?
Okay, so it depends on what country you're in. So I was just looking at London right now. So if you're British and you're applying for an E2 in London, just to get them to acknowledge that you've submitted the papers is taking 2 weeks. Then it takes 45 days for them to review your petition, and then another 2 to 3 weeks to book the interview. So London, horribly backlogged. So I think all of that told is probably at least 2 to 3 months before you could submit. From the time you submit the package, which can take a really long time just to gather all the evidence, to actually getting your passport back with the visa in London is taking over 3 months. That's probably the longest in any country. Whereas you compare that to Australia, and it's like 2 weeks. So there's going to be a real range, and it's very country specific.
You also made a comment about it being a little bit more, at least this is how I inferred it, a little bit more difficult if you're from China or India in regards to some of the E1 visas. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So listen, the United States Supreme Court has ruled that in the context of immigration, immigration is a national security issue. And so what that means is that the government agencies involved in immigration are allowed to, they're allowed to discriminate, for lack of a better word. So all those protected grounds under the US Constitution that Americans take so dearly, those are not necessarily protected for people who are trying to come into the United States from abroad. So you will be treated differently if you're from a country with either higher document fraud or a country with a history of not following US immigration laws, or if your country, like obviously most people know about the Muslim travel ban that unfortunately the Supreme Court upheld in part, which basically allows the US government to discriminate against people from certain Muslim countries. So all of this is allowed under US immigration law, unfortunately. And what that means is that you will be treated differently if you are white from an English-speaking country that's like typically Western to somebody who is from, you know, a Muslim country or something like that. So this is just an unfortunate. This is just the way it works, and you just have to be really prepared and understand that you will be treated differently. And you know, it's really unfortunate. But that's why, again, you want to have somebody to help you with that strategy of how to present yourself.
And the last question related to this topic, Nikki. So, you know, you may cover this later in the presentation, so feel free to let me know that. But let's suppose, you know, a lot of our companies maybe just want to be able to do a lot of sales and business development, you know, which is kind of related to some of the things you've talked about in you know, in the United States. And you know, some of that may take long time. Let's say it takes like a couple of years for some of these projects to get going, just because the sales cycles are long and things like that. So how would they best optimize for something like this?
So really, you want to be tracking your time, your physical presence in the United States for sure. And that's not just from an immigration perspective, but also from a tax one. And this is where it pays to get the good tax advice first. Before you go and spend too much time in the United States and start racking up tax bills. So, you know, I think you have to keep a calendar of how much time you're physically in the United States. You want to do that for tax reasons. And I'm not a tax person, but obviously there's going to be triggers that as soon as you spend too much time in the United States, there's going to be tax consequences to you personally, as well as potentially your foreign business. You also need to be aware of what state you're in. So in California, you know, there are tax consequences even when there's federal treaties. So, you know, between Australia and the US, if they're from a federal perspective, there's tax treaties that cover it. But if you're physically present in California, those rules don't apply. So, and the same with New Jersey, from what I understand from my tax colleagues. So you really have to be tracking not just when you're in the United States, but what state you're in the United States. And then you want to, and from an immigration perspective, you want to be looking at that holistically. So for taxes, they actually do start looking back in time. They'll go, okay, here's your first year in the United States. We're going to count this many days, and the second, and it goes on like that analysis. But for immigration, it's similar, right? So if you tell me you've been in the US for 6 months, like on and off last year in 2017, I'd be like, ugh, you better keep that pretty low next year as well. So it's really just, you know, there's no precise formula. It's a little bit of an art when I'm talking to clients about how much time they're in the United States. But what it comes back to is, you know, where do you reside? What evidence do you have to prove that you're only in the United States temporarily, that you're only doing passive business visitor activities, and that you actually are back in your home country, and that's where you live. So if you're a single man, it's a lot harder, right? Because you have nothing tying you back to your home country. But, you know, if you have, you know, a spouse and kids, you know, obviously bring evidence, some kind of evidence that you're going back to them. If you have a job, I write letters, I call them comfort letters for all of my clients who are doing lots of frequent business travel. What a comfort letter is a sort of legal argument, as well as fact specific about what the person is going to be doing in the United States for the time period. And it just gives the employee or the founder or whoever just a little bit of guidance, so that when they do get off the plane after an 8 or a 14 or even a 5-hour flight, they've read this letter, they go, yep, this is what I'm going to be doing on this particular trip. This is why I still meet the requirements of a temporary visitor. And I'm going to have that in my carry-on bag. And if immigration wants to ask, it's going to be published on my foreign company letterhead, and I'm going to be able to show it. A lot of people make the mistake at the border of talking about how much they love America, how many great connections they have in the United States. Oh, please let me in. I have all this great stuff happening. It's like the opposite. You want to talk about your home country connections. well, I have a wife and kids back home, or I have a husband and, you know, a dog. And, you know, I have a thriving business. I've got like 3 employees that work underneath me. You know, I've got government grants in my home country, and it's there that I live. I just happen to be coming over for some business meetings.
Great. Let's keep going. This is awesome, by the way.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. So this next one, I feel like, you know, this could have been so great. And so basically, but, you know, I think I won't spend too much time on it, because I think I don't know of many immigration lawyers who are trying to do this. So basically, it's called entrepreneur parole. So it would be perfect for a lot of entrepreneurs. Basically, what happened is it's really hard to change the actual law in the United States, because it requires Congress to actually agree on change. And right now we have a very divided Congress. So what happened is, under the Obama administration, they started to look at, well, what kind of policy can we change under the law in order to try to create better, you know, more immigration opportunities. And they did this in a lot of different areas with the kids. A lot of you might have heard of the Dreamers. They did the same thing. So basically, after back and forth with immigration lawyers, the final rule on entrepreneur parole came out, and it basically said that it had these requirements. So if you had $250,000 from a qualified US investor, and that was kind of a complicated thing, like, what is a qualified US investor? It's somebody who had made investments in startups previously. So there was some criteria around that. You know, and these other requirements that you were an important part of the business, you could get this status in the United States. It's very important to understand it's not a visa. It's not an immigration status the way an H-1B visa is. But basically, in my opinion, the people who this would have worked for are people who are in the United States already, maybe on a student visa, who were kind of like a little bit of a genius, who were going to get a whole bunch of funding right out of university, and who could be paroled into the United States in this status off the back of maybe a student visa or another visa. It would be a bit weird and for someone to come in from the outside and to qualify in all these categories, but it could have been done. So, so again, a weird status, not very normal, something that we've used a lot in the humanitarian space, not so much in the business visitor space or the business visa space, but it still was great. The problem is it didn't come into effect until the Trump administration came into power. And what happened is then the Trump administration didn't follow the proper legal process for terminating the program. So basically, when a law changes or when a policy change happens, the government has to give the public the opportunity to comment on the policy change and get feedback. And then, you know, so there's like the process that has to be followed. The process was not followed. So then there was a lawsuit. Anyway, it came into effect in January 2018, but everybody knew that the Trump administration wanted to reverse the policy, as it had done with all of the other Obama administration immigration policy changes. So finally, so it started effective in January. Then following proper procedure now, the administration issued a notice to terminate in May with public comment available. So I would imagine, I'm not sure exactly how long that process takes, but sometime this year, the program will probably terminate. So I would proceed with caution. If you have people in the United States who have done this successfully, immigration lawyers, I'd be more than happy to talk to them, you know, on your behalf, just to get to suss out whether I think it's legitimate before you spend. It's a lot of money too. The filing fees are enormous. There's probably tons of documentation, especially because nobody really knows what the government wants in terms of adjudicating it. And I just don't, my feeling is it's not a long-term solution. Okay, so really sorry about that. Could have been great. And maybe this is something that will come back, you know, in a subsequent administration, you know, in years from now. But unfortunately, I just don't think it's a solid option. So this one is something that is going to be really hard. So this is this is sort of the first work visa option now. So now you've got your, you've got your seed funding from wherever, you're ready to open your US office, and you're ready to start moving yourself or other employees over. The L1 visa is for intercompany transfers. And for this to work, you have to have an overseas company. So you have to have a foreign entity that you or your employee has been working for at least for the last year, or at least one of the last 3 years. And then you have to have a US entity that is a subsidiary or an affiliate, like have at least 50% of the same ownership. Okay. So this is again where you want to talk to an immigration lawyer and a tax lawyer, because a tax person might have they might say to you, oh my God, whatever you do, don't set up a subsidiary. That's going to mess up all your taxes on your foreign entity. So this is where, this is why I came to PwC, because I have a tax person that sits beside me. And when we meet with our clients, we can provide this strategy right there in the room and say, okay, if you want to go the L route, this is why you want to do it, but this is going to be the tax consequences and vice versa. So it's really important to get someone who understands both. So basically, if you do set it up right, what then happens is then you file the petition to US Immigration, which, remember when I talked about US Immigration, things are really tough these days, and they're going to be really hard on an L1, okay? These are the places where we're seeing huge increases in our requests for evidence, automatic denials before they even audit it now. And it's a lot of paperwork, and it's going to be quite expensive. Okay. I was charging, some people might charge like $4,000 or $5,000 US for the professional fees on this. Honestly, that's not worth it for me anymore. It's because it's so much work that I think I'd have to charge even more. It's just the amount of stuff you have to get from the founder and the employee, the amount of documents U.S. Immigration is asking for. It's very labor intensive, and the filing fees are going to be at least, all told, once you get your visa, it's like $2,000-3,000 US on top of that, just on filing fees to the U.S. government. But and then if you have a brand new U.S. business, so let's just say the business hasn't been doing any, you opened it in 2018, there's not really been any business happening. If you do a L1 the first go around in that first year, the person that starts is only going to get a 1 year visa. So it's a lot, and so then you have to go through the process again. Now the second time round, you would be able to get a 3-year visa the second time, or a 3-year petition. So it's it's very painful at the beginning, but this might be, depending what country you're from, this might be your only option. Okay. And so what you're going to have to prove is a lot of stuff. So this is where it starts to get really tricky, because as your lawyer, I'd be like, okay, Nikki, I need a lease for at least 12 months. I need you to have business contracts. I need you to have prospective clients, all this documentation to prove that the company is actually going to thrive in the United States. But then you say, but you told me I'm not allowed to go over and work in the United States. And this is that very delicate dance of being able to go to the United States to set up the business without doing work for the business. So it's all very prospective in terms of thinking about opportunities, but getting enough evidence, like you're going to have to sign a lease to get an L1. You're going to have to, have real customers in the pipeline. So it's a very delicate dance. And if you can get there, the L, once you get over the first year of the first 1 year L, and then the second one, this is a great visa to be on. And L is one of the premier visas to go on. There's sort of 2 categories of it. There's people who are managers or executives. So if you're a founder or the of the business, you're going to probably fit into that category. And then some of your other employees, if you have any, are going to fit into the specialized knowledge. Specialized knowledge is a really hard category to prove, because you have to show that the person has very special skills in your business product that is not available and so an L1B is a really tough category to bring in people with specialized knowledge. But the manager category is probably what all of you as founders would be more likely to fit into. I just want to quickly go back. One of the things that's making US immigration cases really, really hard is again, a Trump administration executive order called Buy American, Hire American. So this happened over a year and a half ago. The Trump administration issued this executive order. And what that has been able to do is it's been able to create policy change and the way that the government adjudicates immigration cases, using this Buy American, Hire American mentality. So now when a US immigration officer looks at any case, whether it's an L1, an O1, even the consular officers are doing it. When they look at a person coming before them, they say, you know, they're starting to put it in this lens. And this is not what the law says. The law does not require you to test the US labor market in every visa category. But what it's saying is, you know, I'm going to put on this why are you not buying American goods and hiring American citizens first? So it's just, everything is tougher, and that's why. Once you get big enough, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, you can pre-qualify the company for a blanket petition, which means instead of having to file individual cases to US immigration, you get to go to the US consulate, which we talked about is the gold standard, right? So for most of you, the only way that's going to happen is probably if you hit 25 million in sales. That's going to be the easiest category. That's probably a long way off for most of you, but this is the goal, right? Just target your sites. For if you want to be moving lots of people over, you want to be getting an L1 blanket. H-1B is probably the one that we hear most of in the immigration parlance, because this is the one that most people around the world are fighting for. So let's just say you don't have a foreign entity. You want to hire somebody that hasn't worked for your foreign business, so they don't qualify for the L. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go into the H-1B lottery. So basically this means the person, there has to be a US job offer that's professional, a US company, and the person being hired themselves has to be professional, okay? Professional is defined by the US Department of Labor as a job requiring a bachelor's degree or the equivalent. So if you don't have a bachelor's degree, but you have 12 years of work experience, that can equate to a professional, that can equate to a bachelor's degree. You have to get a third-party evaluator to do it. It can cost like $300 to $500 US for that. But when you do, then you technically were qualified for the H-1B. It makes it harder these days because, again, filing to US immigration is tough. They're going to be going over it and being like, well, if this person doesn't have a bachelor's degree, then probably this job doesn't require it. So it's very complicated to prepare these packages. The other thing is with the H-1B is you can only do it once a year. So H-1B cap season is in April. There's a lottery. There's 60,000 of these visas available every year. Employers file for them in April, the first week of April. The quota is usually met. They run a lottery. Those who are successful can start their job on October 1st. Okay, so this is again something that's more catered to employers that are already set up in the United States. There are students, they're on F1 visas that they're graduating. They want to hire them right out of school and get them on an H-1B because they're in the US. It's a little easier to manage that April to October because they get protection when they're a student. The big thing on an H-1B that you also have to understand is you have to prove there's an employer-employee relationship. If you're 100% owner of the business, that's going to be really hard. Okay. So again, just sort of like flagging issues, because I've also been talking a lot and I know we're sort of running out of time. And this is a really important slide. So the questions on the E2s came up, the E1 and E2. So this is not all the countries that qualify for an E1 visa. I just put up, a sort of good selection of them, of trying to get Europe, Asia, a little bit of the Caribbean and Africa in there, and South America. So you're going to have to go onto the internet to go to the actual government's website to see if your country has an E1 or an E2 treaty with the United States. E1 is for people who are trading goods with the United States, and E2 is if you're going to invest in the United States. So let's just say you are from, we'll use the UK example because that's the only country where you actually there's a residency requirement. So if you're a British national, but you live in Hong Kong, you're going to have to get back to London if you want to file an E2 because there is a residency requirement. Most of these other countries there isn't, but it would be really weird to apply for an E2 investor visa for as an Aussie if you were in Singapore. That would just be weird. It'd be better to come back to your home country. So there's one of the things I hear a lot from my clients is when they talk to an immigration lawyer, they say, yeah, minimum $100,000 investment. And I'm like, well, there's nowhere in the law that it says that. The law says that your investment has to be substantial and proportionate, okay? So if the value of the business is only $100,000, then you have to invest the whole $100,000. If the value of the business is $10 million, then you probably only have to invest $1 million. So it's a sliding scale and there's no set price, but obviously there's going to be a litmus test that every immigration lawyer has as to whether or not they think this is a valid investment. So, for me, I probably wouldn't go less than $75,000 as the investment, but it's going to depend on what it is. If you're buying an existing business and the existing business costs that much money and you have a really solid business plan and it's explaining how you're going to make money out of this business, then it might work. And it depends, again, what country are you from? What consulate are you going to be applying for? For an E2 or an E1, you have to hire an immigration lawyer who has expertise in the consulate where you're going to apply, okay? And this is where it's critical, okay? So if they don't have any experience working with your country or any like E2 experience, then you want to find somebody else, okay? So, it's okay if they've never done one in your country, if they're a lawyer that's going to like do their research and find out. Because if you've done one, you kind of have done them in others. It's really important that they understand your region, your culture, and what kind of questions the consular officer might be asking. The E2 requires a lot of documentation, but it's an awesome thing these days, given the fact that it's adjudicated at the US consulate. There's no US immigration component. You might get people in the US who want to help you file an E2 to US immigration. And again, I do not recommend that unless there's a very specific reason why you can't physically leave the United States. But don't file stuff to US immigration when there's a consular option. It's just not the way the visa was set up. The e-visas were set up for consular adjudication. Speaking of the Aussies are the luckiest people in the whole world when it comes to US immigration. They have an E3 visa just for Australians. And that is, I actually just realized as a Canadian, I left Canadians off my little slideshow. But anyway, so E3s are for Australian professionals. H1B ones are for Singaporean and Chilean professionals. So all three of those countries have the same criteria. So the H1B ones are carved out of of the cap. So most Singaporeans and Chileans can just go straight to their consulate and apply for an H1B1 visa. They have to meet the same requirements as an H1B. So there's a two-step process. But again, it's going to be adjudicated overseas, so it's obviously way better. For all of these ones, you have to also be careful. There does have to be an employer-employee relationship. And I think for a long time, Aussies have gotten away with the idea that this is entrepreneur visa. It is not. You have to prove that you're an employee of the US business, even if you're the 100% owner. The way you do that is by having a board of directors or something that can show that the business is bigger than you. I forgot to put Canadians on here. It's been a while since I did a TN visa. A TN is a visa just for Canadian professionals, but unfortunately for Canada, their treaty is just not as good as some of the other treaties because it limits the number of professions. So you have to fit into one of the boxes. And this is actually a personal story. When I was deciding where to go to graduate school in the United States, I was a Canadian citizen. Lawyer was on the list. And that's why I went to law school. That's how bad I wanted to stay in the United States. I mean, I did want to be a lawyer, but it put me into a box. Sorry, I'm burning through these, but I just want to make sure we end on time. So the O1 is for people of extraordinary ability, whether you're an athlete, actor, business person, or scientist or researcher. This is going to lend well to people who have had a startup career and potentially already sold something successfully and are now onto their second or third endeavor. the O1 is very much for people who have a public profile. So if you're slaving away in secret R&D and you're going to debut some amazing, product, but nobody knows about it, the O1 is not going to work for you. You do have to have a US person sponsor you. So you have to have an agent or a company or an employer sponsor you. So you can't sponsor yourself. But you can have this idea of an agent. So I do a lot of them with an agent, and that allows you to work for multiple people. But it's this is very document heavy. It's going to be very expensive, but it ends up being a 3-year visa, which is great. The thing I always tell people is don't shy away from this extraordinary ability category. I do a lot of O1 visas. It's up to the lawyer to tell you honestly whether they think you have a valid case. And it's going to be very much on what evidence you can give to the lawyer to show that you are extraordinary. And there's a whole bunch of different things that you can hit off target. Okay. We already talked about the H-1B one, so I won't go into that. Let me just see what I have left. Okay. Yeah, my last little tips. We have 5 minutes left. Pay for good advice, especially on the tax side, because if you get it wrong, my problem is I see a lot of people who've been successful. They've got to the United States. They've now got a few employees, and everything is a total disaster because the immigration, they've got good immigration advice, but they haven't got tax advice. They don't know how they're running payroll. They don't, the founder didn't get individual tax advice. So spend your money on good strategic advice. I know you don't have it, but we're like, one of the things we're doing at PwC is trying to create sort of like more templated products for startups so that they're off the shelf. And then, you can select a menu of like additional advice. And we also work with a lot of advisors to help them implement it. So find those kind of people. Okay. Always have your government hat on. So just remember, you're speaking the US government's language, whether you're dealing with the consulate, the Department of Labor, US Immigration, or Customs and Border Patrol protection. You need to be thinking like a US government official, okay? And the last thing, and I it's sort of more like, this is not immigration advice, this is my worldly advice at my, non-entrepreneur age stage, but basically, use your home country, right? Use it for all it's worth, maximize your success, take every opportunity. I never say no to anything. And I tell my clients, don't say no, because all of that stuff that you do in your home country, a good immigration lawyer will be able to find a place to use it in your immigration case later on. Okay? Awesome. Sorry, I spent through 2 minutes to go.
No, it's okay. I actually, there's a few questions here in the chat room that I'd love to get to. Ruben asks, he's thinking about potentially attending an accelerator in US. It's a 4-month program. It's on a B1 instead of a H3. And he would like to bring his spouse and his 2 kids. What kind of visa would he need to get for them?
So that's a great question, really critical, and especially if you want the kids to be going to school. So if they're babies, then not so much of an issue. You would get B2 tourist visas for your spouse and the children, and you would all go in together. So my recommendation is everyone books their visa interviews and goes in together. Even though the B2 and the B1, you have to technically apply for separately, try to book them at the same time, and everyone goes to the window together, and the consular officer then can adjudicate everyone at the same time. That's my recommendation. But if the kids are school age and you want them to be actually going, to public school in the United States, they are going to have to get an annotation on their visa label that says that says they're allowed to go to school. Now, you probably want to talk to an immigration lawyer because you want to make sure you carefully plan that out and you have all the language correct. Because the children of a B are only allowed to go to school in specific categories. So you are going to have to get that B1 in lieu of H3 visa in order for your kids to be allowed to go to school, to public school. Now, caveat that with, technically in the United States, public schools are supposed to take money from foreigners to send their kids to school, but it depends on where you are. California doesn't seem like they do that. Other states, they might do that. So there's a lot of like more practical things that you're going to have to sort out if they're going to be going to school.
Another question here is, are there quotas for O1s, and what's the time frame on the applications there?
Yeah, so there's no quota on the O1. So the O1, like I said, they're getting harder. So we're seeing a lot more requests for evidence. So the timeline, it depends. You can O1, the same with L1, you can pay for what we call premium processing. So premium processing is an additional $1,225 US filing fee that you pay in order for US immigration to adjudicate your case in 15 days. So if you don't, so there's pros and cons to using premium processing. Sometimes what'll happen is they use it as a time management tool. So on day 14, if your case is not adjudicated, they simply issue a request for evidence on your case, which sucks because you may not have got one had you not submitted premium processing. But it's just too hard to know. It's a lot better. Premium processing is just better, especially if you're going to get a request for evidence. It gets faxed to your lawyer. You can start working on it rather than waiting for mail. If you file regular processing with an O, typically the processing time is about 3 months. So if you have time, and you don't want to spend another, that's a lot of money to file that additional filing fee, especially because an O1 is going to be quite expensive on the legal fees because it's a lot of work gathering all the documents.
Yeah. All right. It's funny, when we get to the end of the webinar, all these new questions start coming in.
That's okay.
I want to ask one more question, and this is the last one here. It says, I'm going to read it, but look, Christian, you're going to have to go back and watch this because Nikki did cover some of the parameters taken into account for L1, but he basically has a company that is incorporated both in the U.S. and his home country. When is the right time to apply for an L1 visa?
Well, so if the company has been doing business in the United States without you for at least 1 year, then the nice thing is that you can, let me just turn. He's been doing business in the United States for at least 1 year, then you might want to wait for you to apply for the L1 until after that year ticks by so that you're going to get a 3-year L. So that would be one strategy if you can. But that's only if you have people in the US that are doing the work and the companies actually, because you're going to have to prove that it's been actively doing business for that year. So if you can get to that place, so it just depends on the business. If there is people in the US doing work for you, if you have salespeople and you can show that kind of stuff, then great, wait the 1 year tick and then apply. Otherwise, it's going to be just what does your lawyer think? Like, how much evidence do you have? Because these days, it's just, it's almost inevitable that you're going to get a request for evidence, but I wouldn't say, so then there's like some lawyers are going, well, let's just, let's hold a little bit back and then we'll get the request for evidence and then we'll hone in. But what they've decided to do, and one of the most recent policy changes is they're just issuing denials right away, no request for evidence. So you have to give them 100% of your best work at the very beginning. And that's really hard for my clients. I always get what I want after a request for evidence. So I'm telling you, when the lawyer says, give you X, Y, Z, you give it to them, you dig, you spend the time because I know you're busy, but it just astounds me. Every single L1 case I submit that gets a request for evidence, my clients always give me what I asked for 6 months before. So just take the time to find it. You don't understand what they're asking for, a phone call is really important. And I think I will tend to try to be document driven and email driven. The second I get on the phone and understand the business, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, let's use that piece. So a lot of times we're just speaking different languages. And if you can figure out how to teach your lawyer what it is you're actually doing as a business, because think about it, like every business is so unique, teach them about what you're doing. And then if they're good, they're going to be able to creatively think, that piece of evidence, that's what I normally use. That's going to be great.
Awesome. Well, look, on that note, I just want to personally thank you so much for, taking the time out of your busy schedule to educate us like this. For everyone else in the chat room, we've recorded this, so Phil, you're probably going to want to go back and rewatch this because it was really, really good. A lot of detailed information. Nikki, thank you so much for taking the time to doing this. This was really, really great.
You're welcome. I wish you all the best. And, anyone that has any questions, feel free to email me, and I can either connect you to a colleague or, see if I can help you, or even just whatever you need. I love working with founders. So thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Founder Insights podcast. If you want to learn more, check out fi.co/podcast or sign up for our newsletter at fi.co/subscribe. Thanks.